Boom. Welcome. This is Hikosaemon. You're listening to the sounds of music that I've made, that I've been listening to. I might show some tracks in the start of the show. Hope you're all doing well. Good to see you. So the title tonight, The Birds, the Bees and the North Koreans. Well, tonight my 7-year-old son was watching the children's oriented NHK News, and there was a big feature on North Korea. So yeah, he was interested in all the missiles and everything, and I started to explain. It's kind of like, how do you explain North Korea to a 7-year-old son? Particularly the fact that they were focusing on the fact that North Korea might be shooting missiles at us here in Japan. It was an awkward one. It was an interesting chat to have. I will go into how I tackled that question. I guess this show has been good preparation for that conversation. I did a lot of similar things. However, let's see who's here. We got the Sergeant Bilko. Excellent to see you. Travis Moore got here last. Lost the internet, I'm afraid. Well, I'm just glad that you made it. Who else we got here? We got Boom Time from Tyler Nakamura. Good to see you, sir. Benjamin Harris, waiting for the boom. The boom arrived. I hope you heard it. Andrea Moboya, good to see you. And you got to go to Melbourne today. Got to Melbourne today. There to visit family and friends. Makes a nice change from China. I guess it would. I must admit, I don't know that. By the way, this is Perry Tune at the moment. What is this track? This track is Harvest 4, royalty-free music. Let's get back to like the let's get back to the more recent tracks. How do I do that on this? Oh, that's not it. Come on, SoundCloud. Hide. So let's go into the most recent ones. My most recent track is coming up now. Dave O'Hunter, hi, good to see you. Kimmy Kim, good to see you. This is my latest track. This is called Walk On, because it's the BPM of walking, and it's all I could think of at the time. I've actually been going for like this kind of New York house type key sequence, and I can't find a scale that works that I can do it. I don't know how to describe it. The scale that I've been trying to use, it's been very frustrating. This is kind of close, but I kind of like the hooking, so I stuck with it. Who else we got in here? We got Mata Gaijinka. Good to see you, Gabriel. I like this beat. We got Travis Moore, and yes, that's right, hard to explain to anybody. We got Criso de la Erikejo. Good to see you and welcome. Who else we got here? We got Yi Mint Han. Hi, boom indeed. Nice to have people from Myanmar watching. Who else we got here? Tokyo Twilight. So excellent to see you. Welcome back. We got Mr. Cordy Chep. Who else we got here? Robert Old Dude, man, everybody's piling in here. Giancarlo Sands, excellent. Giancarlo Sands has arrived. Everybody calm down and relax. It's okay, he's here. Who else we got here? Natalie Pate, is that Pate or Pate or Pate? In fact, Pate sounds good because I like to pate myself. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, but now that I say it like that, I want to change my name to that. By the way, you may find this music incredibly annoying. If you do, tough. I made it. It actually sounds quite good. I mean, you know, I'm biased, of course. Who else have we got in here? Is there anyone? Have I skipped over people? I hope I haven't. Oh, we got Bad Chase. Good to see a Bad Chase. Raz isn't here, but I guess, you know, I did post the notice of the stream a little bit late, so I'm sorry about that. But yeah, I'll tell you what, I will say hello to more people as they come in. Of course, if you put questions or comments right there in the comments, I will try to pay attention and give you the priority of the subject matter, but otherwise I'm just going to rock through my tweets and stuff that I found interesting this week that I have been tweeting about, which is displaying right here, starting with this stream that you can see being advertised. I think I said Mr. Cordy Chip. Did I not say Mr. Cordy Chip? I'm saying Mr. Cordy Chip. I guess it's hard to notice you when Raz isn't like beating you up and vice versa, like always, but yeah. But anyway, so what do we got tonight? There was actually, I did actually just tweet something else, which was that I found an interview with Jim Bolger interesting, which surprises me as well. and you don't need to know about because it's New Zealand stuff. Mr. Solar Flares, good evening from Nara. It's good to have someone from Nara and someone called Mr. Solar Flares. I find that very exciting and scary somewhat at the same time, but there we go. Mr. Cordy Chep says that North Korea is like an abusive spouse. He tells you it was your fault that you got thrown down the stairs. Well, pretty much, that's right. Yes, I didn't quite get into the domestic abuse aspect of the relationship with North Korea when I was explaining it to my 7-year-old. I said basically, important to remember it's a normal country just like Japan. In fact, remembering that my son is Japanese. I reminded him when his grandmother was a child, North Korea was part of Japan, just like Korea and Taiwan were. They were Japanese people there. They're just the same as us. They went down a slightly different path because they had bad leaders. Kang and Kodos, glad that you made it. But yes, for all of that, I particularly brought that up when the issue of the abductees and so on came up, and the rockets and so on. But yeah, it was an interesting chat. So what else we got here? It turns out, so there has been a really interesting, Mr. Cordy Chip, I think you got to be careful. Good night, Andrea Mulboy. Thank you for joining and coming and say hello. Have a good night there. Back in Melbourne. To say it's not a normal country, well, it's not a normal government, certainly. I don't think, you never know how far you can go into saying that about the people. That's what I'd say. I still would like to assume that they're normal. I went to Romania just after that government collapse. I went there in about 1993, and I think that's a lot like what North Korea would be like. And I think the people there are going to be pretty. It's going to take a long time for them to normalize. It's like the whole country's been sort of forced into a cult. But that said, the people there are still people. They're still essentially, I think you should understand, normal. But yes, indeed, it's pretty tough. I'll let this track play out. So there's been Phoebe Wang, good night, and hello, and good night. Good to see you all. So I want to talk about this first story up here. This is from the Asahi Shimbun Digital, and the story there, the 7 there, is talking about a $7 million. Well, there was a heist this week of 3.5 million. Good point to Nakamura. There was a heist this week of $3.5 million US cash. In fact, to say it was a heist, it was actually more of a mugging. It was a really interesting case. Hey, James O'Hara. Well, James O'Hara, Korean or Japanese, and that they were subject to the God Emperor's will, and that they voted for people in the Japanese parliament, and that they had full citizenship, which the British Empire never gave anyone in the British Empire. But they it's not to say that they had a good time. They had, there were lots of people who didn't like being Japanese. There were partisans who, fought against the Japanese, and of course both North Korea and South Korea celebrate the people who assassinated the first Prime Minister of Japan, as resistance fighters, and as they're entitled to do. There was arguably the annexation was forced on them, but it wasn't that they were entirely slaves. Although there were slaves as well, obviously, but as a population, a lot of successful North Korean people fought for the Japanese military, and were educated in Japan and all that sort of stuff as well. It's a complex relationship, as is inevitable when you colonize any country. It's just like Britain colonized India, and plenty of Indians got educated at Oxford and became statesmen in the independent India as well. And India got just totally screwed by Britain, and they never became citizens, right? So it's complicated. It is complicated, particularly with North Korea, because they were able to control the narrative there. But anyway, let me come back to the heist story, because this is interesting. I keep saying it's a heist because the amount of money justifies the term heist, but it was actually a mugging, and it was such a convenient mugging that it was... it was such a convenient... Hey, Ben Duncan, good to see you. It was such a convenient mugging that it has to be said, it looks kind of dodgy. A bit of context. So what happened was, the news story was one of the biggest robberies, in recent history in Japan, where it was when it was basically a case where a 29-year-old Adachi man had been arrested by had been assaulted by two assailants while he was putting a suitcase with $3.5 million cash into the back of his car in a private car park. The two assailants were in a car already parked in the car park waiting for that person, so they obviously knew what was going on. And yes, they made off with the suitcase full of cash. The person who was assaulted was 29 years old and from the social welfare capital of Tokyo. I mean, from Adachi. I've gotten some hassles for expressing negative opinions about Adachi before. But there is a question what a 29-year-old Adachi man was doing with a suitcase full of $3.5 million that some people who mugged him were apparently tipped off to. And this took place in Fukuoka, which is, like the opposite end of the country. It's about like 800 kilometers away from Tokyo. It's very close to Fukuoka Prefecture. It's probably known as the Yakuza capital of Japan at the moment. I mean, I suppose people think of Kobe and Osaka as the main places, but in terms of places just having like Yakuza trouble, Kitakyushu in particular, they've got real issues with the Gotogumi down there. So yeah, it's kind of like in Fukuoka, a suitcase with a lot of money was stolen, and everyone was tweeting at me and saying this looks like it was a payoff. So hey, Eunice B, good to have you along. And you did indeed make it in time. So the whole thing about how did they know that this cash was going to be there? This person spent apparently ages, and I think I read that it took like 2 suitcases. This person was in the bank. They went down to Fukuoka to take the money out of a local Mizuho bank branch. It turns out, now we're finding out some more about it, the money was not actually the money of the 29-year-old. Apparently it was the boss of a metal parts company or a metalworking factory company. Now admits that he instructed the 29-year-old to carry the 7 million yen cash. I mean, why in the hell they're walking around with a suitcase full of that much cash? And what the purpose was for. I mean, it really looks like they were paying off mobsters and trying to make it look like a robbery, pretty much. But the police are still investigating. Apparently, the people who were driving the getaway car for the heist were stopped at the airport in Fukuoka trying to fly to Korea. 2 of the people were arrested were Korean citizens, South Korean. And yeah, we're still going to find out about it, but it does look very much like a payoff situation. Lysander 45, good to have you along. Good to see you. But yes. So what else have we got there? And James R, I could probably go on all night about the comparisons. Obviously, and it's now accepted historically that the people of Korea did not enjoy being Japanese. It was complicated for the Koreans who stayed in Japan. Obviously, I mean that remains complicated in many ways. But yeah, we could go all night talking about the differences between different approaches to colonialism. But let's face it, I mean, Korea was basically invaded and taken over by Japan. They made it all look nice and official, but that's how the whole British Empire was set up. And yes, I'm sorry, I'll stop. I'm doing it, and I will stop there. Amber, good to see you. But point is, these people were Japanese. They were stripped of their citizenship, which was good if they had a new country, which they did after World War II. If they were in Korea, or North Korea, South Korea, they didn't have a country. If they were in Japan, it was a big deal. Well, let's come back to it. This was just really interesting as a New Zealander and incredibly boring for anyone else. So you should not watch this if you're not a New Zealander and you weren't conscious during the early 1990s, which is probably all of you. So forget about it. This is kind of interesting. Hey, Olivia D, good to see you. You're popping in from, you're doing Hanami in Toronto, Canada today. Well, okay, go enjoy the Hanami in Toronto, Canada, and tell everybody in Toronto, Canada that I said hello, even though they have no idea who I am. Just tell them that I care. This bald, middle-aged person in a room by himself in Tokyo talking to the internet wishes them all a happy Hanami. It's actually full bloom at the moment in Aomori, so you can still do Hanami if you come up to Japan. In fact, it moves up to the colder areas, so it kind of shows Toronto's got a similar climate right now to Aomori at the very top of Honshu, and probably next week it'll get up to Hokkaido, so there you go. So yes, Aosem 88. Koreans freely adopted Japanese names. They hated it so much. Yeah, it's kind of oh no. If you want to learn anything about Korea, I do not suggest checking out Random Yoko. Hey, you're free to get any sources of information that you like, but yeah, that's not a good idea. The last year or 2 years of the war, which was actually of the 40 years that Korea was colonized, it was when the war was starting to turn against Japan. Japan enforced mandatory Japanese language education. They actually taught, the Japanese government ran education in Korea in Korean until 1943, but in those last 2 years they started imposing Japanese names, normally Japanese readings of the Korean names, which that people didn't like and people resented the language, and people talk about now how that imposition of Japanese language in the last 2 years of the war represented an attempted genocide. I mean, let's face it, they never asked to be colonized in the first place, or at least the majority certainly didn't. You know, Japanese government took advantage of some factions in Korea that were trying to play off China and Russia, and it worked out to be as bad for Japan as it did. No, not as bad for Japan as Korea. It worked out pretty badly for everybody is the point, and worst of all for the Koreans. Hey, the Japan dude, good to have you along, the Japan dude. More for you from. I like the very long introduction on the title there on the name. Let's get back into the subjects. This is coming back, talking about Korea, and another kind of looking at the historic stuff. So the USS Carl Vinson, after temporarily going to the Indian Ocean in search of North Korea, is now back on track. It's been doing exercises with the Australian Navy in Indonesia, and is now apparently going to be in the Sea of Japan in the next few days, and is going to be starting exercises with Japan. The Sino-Japanese War is fascinating, and I tell you what, the Russo-Japanese wars as well are also fascinating, and that's coming up to the point that I'm about to talk about, which is that with all of the tension coming up that America is putting in an armada off North Korea's coast, it is very interesting that the Japan dude has changed icon and name, but all good, all good. Russia has apparently stacked the border of North Korea with its own forces, and that's really interesting. No one quite knows what Russia is playing at with stacking the border at the moment, and it's open to speculation, I suppose. There's two things I can think of which are totally different scenarios. One is that America is preparing to do strikes against North Korea, and Russia might assist North Korea with retaliating against the United States, particularly if it's got its ships off the coast there. It might help assist North Korea with detecting and striking back against the US ships. The other possibility, which I think is also interesting and also likely, is that anticipating a possible strike by America which could affect the leadership of North Korea, maybe Russia's there to actually change the leadership of North Korea. Entirely possible, by the way, that China has also got the similar designs, and that they could use intervention by the US as an opportunity. That would be slightly better scenario, perhaps, than Russia joining the side of the North Koreans fighting America, which would be the World War III scenario. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to see what would happen. Would China and Russia use the situation opportunistically? Would they use regime change opportunistically in North Korea to try to get better control over the next regime, given that it appears, although you never know what's really going on, that the current North Korean regime appears to have told China to go to hell, and appears to not have any connection visible with Russia, which is interesting because they've always kind of played off Russia and China for influence. So the saddest thing about North Korea is, according to some Korean students, that Michael Gillen Pickett, welcome sir, is that prior to World War II it was an interesting place to be. It was a place of writers and artists, the Soho of Korea. And also interesting, although the Korean Peninsula relatively escaped getting bombed during World War II, Taiwan and Korea didn't get targeted in any way like occupied countries in Europe did. I mean, the Allies bombed the hell out of France while it was occupied, for example. They more than made up for that by the fact that, under MacArthur during the Korean War, North Korea was bombed actually more heavily than all of Europe and the Asian theater in World War II. And apparently in Pyongyang, there were, although it survived World War II relatively intact, I mean, apart from the colonialism and so on, apparently there were only 2 buildings left standing. I mean, all the same people, General LeMay and Douglas MacArthur, all the people who orchestrated the air campaign against Japan, did the same thing against North Korea. And they pretty much, I mean, they didn't need to drop an A-bomb. They pretty much just conventionally did the same thing. And it's important to remember this when you consider why, when you ask the question, why are the North Koreans so pissed off at America? Why are they working on ICBMs that can carry nuclear weapons, and would they really do it? Well, you think within the lifetime, I mean, it still isn't that far ago, 60 years ago, I mean, America did the equivalent of more or less nuking a lot of North Korea, I mean, and South Korea, by the way. They bombed everywhere. It's kind of hard to comprehend the damage that, and the loss of life that was suffered at the hands of America. And the truth is, most people don't know actually how much those cities suffered then. So no question, they've been through the absolute ringer. I mean, and truth be told, I mean, even South Korea, which is thought of as doing pretty well, they've had democracy since 1987, but it's had its ups and downs, and it's pretty clear that the societies are still recovering from, a long period of being occupied by annexed and part of Japan, and then along a terribly destructive war that followed. And this is part of the reason why, if you really, as I think the American policymakers understand, if you really understand what Korea went through, there's good reason to be very afraid of what North Korea would do with ICBMs and a bomb. But that's the thing, you don't know. What planet was that? What planet was that North Korea was bombed by America? I don't know. Russia smashed Japan in World War II. Yeah, that's what planet was that, I suppose. Russia never really got the chance. I mean, Japan had already surrendered when they announced their brave invasion. But anyway, who knows what Russia's thinking about here, but it is very, very interesting. Natural division. I see there's a lot of weird stuff happening here. Japanese military could not have intercepted the A-bombs at all. I mean, that's ridiculous. Some interesting stuff here. Hey, Channel Ralph, good to see you. Henrik Weber, I think we wait till the Germans make the first strike, because the World War can't start without Germany making the first step. I don't understand how to process that comment, but thank you for making it. A story here about the cafeteria at Google in Japan. I've been to it, and it is really, really good. You know what? Sorry, Mr. Cordychep, that is a good point. And actually, I think the largest tank battle of World War II happened in Manchuria, right? Yeah, smash Japan, though, is still a bit of an exaggeration. And remember, it wasn't just Japan. They also fought against the Manchurian military, which was, not part of the Japanese military. But it was fair point about the battles in Manchuria, which it always interests me. There isn't a lot of historical coverage of, in spite of the fact they were very significant. But yeah, starting from 1950, USA has done over 30 large-scale bombings against other countries. Well, yeah, I mean, James O'Hara, Britain started World War II, not Germany. That's interesting. I thought Britain was late to the game on that, but maybe there's stuff that I don't understand. The Japan dude tells me to read his comment about China, so I'm going to go back up and try to find the Japan dude talking about China. I'll tell you what, you do me a favor, Japan dude, of saying it again, because I don't see it. The US doesn't want, China won't let it happen. I did see that, but apparently China at the moment doesn't have any influence. Apparently they banked on the person who got assassinated in Malaysia. China's not showing a lot of influence, but we'll see. They may or they may not happen. Anyway, back to the cafeteria at Google. It is very good. It is designed to make people never want to go home, which is a little bit scary and disturbing, but it is free. It is delicious. It is actually really, really good. I've been lucky enough to go there a couple of times, and I agree with this. For me, actually, it is probably, well, apart from the fact, of course, Google is a fascinating company, but I'd say the cafeteria is almost the biggest selling point. It is the best cafeteria I've ever seen in any company in Japan. My first job in Japan in a factory, a silicon wafer factory in Umesato in Noda, north of, basically northern Chiba. Yeah, it was a factory with 20 minutes walk away from the nearest convenience store, 25 minutes walk away from the train station. There was just a Caesarea, a Lawson, and we weren't allowed to leave the factory during the day. So I had the factory, the silicon wafer factory cafeteria, and for budget purposes, I had the 220 yen katsukare lunch quite frequently, which always caused me to get diarrhea whenever I had it. I lost 20 kilos on that project, and that's the worst cafeteria. And I ate there for 2 years. The worst cafeteria. My whole life would have been so different if I worked at Google. I would have been much probably fatter. But there we go. That's good food. So if you're thinking of joining Google, there's a good reason to do it. I saw the story and I thought, wow, that is actually something worth talking about. What else we got here? Oh man, Japan Post. So we've all heard about how Toshiba has been created by its failing Westinghouse nuclear power division in the US going bankrupt, and how it's pretty much destroyed one of the biggest companies in Japan. Well, here's another one of the biggest companies in Japan, the Japanese Post Office, which actually owns all of the savings. The entire economic miracle is based on the collateral of the savings of all the people who were keeping their money in it. And they thought they had this great idea of buying Australian Post, or some sort of Australian post office, and it's apparently, like, in 1 year generated like $4 billion of losses, which looks like it's going to actually risk really damaging the Japanese parent company, which raises the question, is it that Japanese companies suck at managing foreign subsidiaries? Is it that they're just terrible at picking good companies to buy? Who knows? But it probably is a combination of all of those things. I used to work in mergers and acquisitions at a law firm, and I did inbound and outbound, but it was always cross-border, cross-cultural. I'd say if you're going to define Japanese companies, particularly acquiring foreign companies, one, they don't do long negotiations. Everything is super fast. The transactions are often cash-based, because Japanese companies tend to just have lots of liquidated cash on hand that they can just pay extra money to solve problems. They usually pay above recommended prices, and they actually use their willingness to pay more than something's worth as a negotiation tool. And they tend to be kind of hands-off with companies after they buy them, and they tend to have very, very loose plans for integration. And frankly, I saw lots of cases where companies just didn't have any real idea of how they were actually going to run these companies, and they thought they would just be like cool parents with teenage kids who would just let them look after themselves. And these companies expected to be looked after and all this sort of thing. But there have been some very, very savvy and companies who have been very good at M&A. I'd say Kirin is one of them. The Japanese beverage companies, they own most of the world now, and they're doing very well of it. However, the post office, this was a government-run post office that was privatized, only launched as a private company a year or two ago. And this is a very, very big transaction for a similar company, but, with similar sort of big issues. And, again, acquiring a failing nuclear power plant, I don't know what Toshiba was thinking, but I guess they all assumed that given that these are kind of quasi-public industries, they were hoping that the foreign governments would support them supporting those companies. But yeah, it's just a mess, isn't it? So Ben Duncan wishes he had a diet with lots of Google fiber. It's much better than silicon wafer factory fiber, I can tell you that. Do they have a Gold's Gym? I don't know. Do you know somewhere that Japan did with a Gold's Gym? That would be an interesting selling point. My current company actually has a gym nearby, but I've never really gotten into using it. I like to punch and kick, so I go somewhere else. This is just kind of depressing. There's all these stories now. This is why self-driving cars can't come to Japan in particular soon enough. Japan, of course, has this huge demographic bubble at the moment, this glut of elderly people now in the 60s and getting into their 70s, and this huge population of these people who are having reduced capacity, especially outside of Tokyo. You need to have a car to survive in most parts of Japan. So, but when you get into your 70s and so on, and you become less able to function and drive, you get these things, all of these cases of elderly people, no doubt innocently, just hitting the wrong pedal, the accelerator instead of the brake, And we've all seen these funny stories of old men and old ladies who, unwittingly pressed down on the wrong pedal and reacted too slowly, and the cars, drove into someone's backyard. But these are happening every day now in Japan. And in a lot of cases where there are things like, in this case, at a supermarket car park, they're running over and killing people. Not cool. And I don't know, on the one hand, it's kind of like, I couldn't imagine. It's just such a horrible thing. And it's kind of like you can't really prosecute the drivers, or maybe you can, for reckless driving or for whatever, but it's in a way it's an innocent mistake. But the thing is, these people shouldn't be driving cars, obviously. And this is again why, if there's going to be anything motivating Japan to win the race to have self-driving cars, it's this. And the media is paying a lot of attention to it. Looking back at the comments, gyms are pretty expensive. Well, Google does have one. Well, there we go. Yeah, and by the way, Japan does, like every country, have a program for for checking elderly people's skills. There are cases apparently where dementia can onset, like apparently you do it first in 5-year lots and then 2-year lots as you get older. But there are cases where I remember really hearing about a case where someone passed a dementia test and a driving test who was in their 80s, and they passed it like 2 years ago, but from 1 year ago they developed dementia. So yeah, it's a tough thing, but it's where I think we need to fix this. A really interesting part about the discussion with Jim Bolger, that really the ex-New Zealand Prime Minister, when they asked him what the most important issue for New Zealand was, he didn't hesitate, and he actually talked about this in other places as well. It was accelerating and fostering the integration of as much immigration as possible into New Zealand, which New Zealand is considered to be an underpopulated country. But he also emphasized as well that things like, for example, New Zealand's race relations issues, and the people, some targeting Asian people, some targeting Pacific Islanders. Again, he was really emphatic, and this is a person who was the equivalent of a Republican president. He was a conservative prime minister, but he was pointing out, the days of white people running everything are long gone, and New Zealand needs to be open, needs to be fostering future leaders from basically seeking to attract people from all parts of the world. And then he said at the end as well, New Zealand needs to increase the intake of refugees that it's taking. He talks about how it was an interesting point, and it's kind of different. It's refreshing actually, because I've been in Japan so long, I've kind of forgotten to think about this. He points out New Zealand was colonized by people who were not timid people, right? It takes a big deal to pack up your whole life, get on a boat and go halfway around the world to New Zealand, which is also what the Maori themselves. Most Maori arrived in New Zealand in the 1200s, and they had to go a long way as well, from Samoa and from Cook Islands and so on, big sort of boats, seafaring boats. Everyone who got to New Zealand were basically the sort of crazy, foolhardy, sort of determined sort of people. And he points out, this is the people who represent that kind of spirit most in the world today really are refugees. And he basically thinks, in terms of people who embody the sort of spirit of the people who made up New Zealand, he fully expects to see refugees become, or the children of refugees, to become prime ministers of New Zealand in the future, and we need to open the door to them. It was a really, it was maybe a little bit simplistic, but compared to when you compare the New Zealand population debate, which is, how can we find ways to take more refugees and, integrate them properly in the society, and the Japan debate, which is just about how do we manage the inevitable decline of our population. It's just basically there's lots of discussion about that, and that's just an interesting discussion there. Lysander 45, New Zealand doesn't have high standards for immigration. It's pretty easy. New Zealand, Australia is incredibly tight, but New Zealand is actually incredibly open to immigration. If you look it up, if you've got complaints about New Zealand standards for immigration, you probably can't go anywhere. New Zealand and Canada are pretty much the most open countries in the world, at least outside of Europe. So that's interesting. I asked him, RSM 88. Well, that's terrible. In fact, that's I won't. I'm going to put you on a warning for that. So we'll leave it at that, shall we? But yeah, well, we have, or at least we've been proactively settling the Treaty of Waitangi claims. License to 45, yeah, really. I mean, at least my information isn't completely up to date, but yeah, we're an underpopulated country, and we need more people. We proactively encourage and foster immigration. Australia's doesn't. Australia's really tough to get into, but New Zealand's very different. I assume you're confusing New Zealand with Australia, which I'm used to. It's okay. But yeah, no, and James O'Hara, we've been doing our best with that. If you look at the Sea Lords deal and a bunch of other deals, what can you do? So yeah, what else have we got here? We've got there's a poll recently taken of Asian countries, where countries that trust Japan, or countries with populations that trust Japan. What's interesting, of the results here, it turns out that in reverse order, Thai people, 89% of Thai people trust Japan. French, 80.4%. England, 65.4%, which is surprisingly low, I suppose, if you compare it to the French number. America, 76.7%. However, if you go to China, 16.9%, and South Korea, 13.8%. South Korea trusts Japan less than China does, and theoretically, at least indirectly, through the United States alliance, Japan is kind of an indirect ally of South Korea. So it's kind of disappointing, but I guess it also highlights the challenges for the United States and other allies in the region of trying to work with both countries. Speaking of which, North Korea actually gave Japan a special mention today, mentioning that they would basically that the Japanese archipelago, saying don't feel regret when the Japanese archipelago is sunk into the ocean. Again, the national news there, slightly different messages to the news in other countries. They threaten to sink the entire archipelago. Thank you for mentioning Japan. It's nice to know that you're thinking of us. And good question, Mr. Cordychip, about what you're trusting. Who knows? Replacing the toilet paper could be anything. Dex makes Bala. Good day to you along, and it's Paper Tiger. Well, but they do supply Syria, North Korea, Syria, Iran, those countries with Scud missiles. They're pretty good missiles. They do actually have nuclear bombs, and they do have a legitimate axe to grind in some ways with the United States. So I would, but at the same time, I think Japan is certainly taking the approach of just ignoring them. So yeah, James O'Hara, good point. They did outlaw cats and dogs, if I recall. And is that a compromise to the white man? Who knows? What else have we got here? Apple Pay is winding out in Japan. There are at the moment the employment system looks like. There's actually a question here which I won't go into the detail of, but it's a question of can a company stop you using up your open vacation days when you are quitting? Can they prevent you from doing that? And there's online lawyer's advice there, which is basically, what was the answer? And actually it's got some tricks as to how you can actually get your vacation days, even if they try to stop you. I went to Uniqlo today and I liked it. Mr. Jones last night, 2.5 Oyajis was back last night. It was a triumphal comeback. It was good. Don't call it a comeback. We've been here for years. It was pretty good though. We had Mr. Jones, who's been basically trying to create this Big in Japan documentary. And it looks like it's ready to go, but they need some funding for the licensing of it, and they've got a kind of a Kickstarter called what is it? Well, anyway, the links are on the video, and it's well worth supporting the cause of this guy. He's been very good getting around the Japan community while he was here making the documentary, and it would be very good to see it get finalized and made. So yeah, and check out, it was good to be back with Victor, even though Victor had like a Marlon Brando Godfather voice. It actually felt kind of appropriate, even though it was 2.5.1. Yeah, it was kind of appropriate, even though it was completely unintentional. He was actually sick. For all the issues supposedly between Japan and China, and Chinese people not trusting Japan, Japan's making it increasingly easy for Chinese to come into Japan. Hey, Hemmingford Grey 62, good to see you. So yeah, now they're expanding the multiple entry visas for Chinese people to come to Japan. So whatever's happening anywhere else, and actually possible, thank you for the reminder there. It is worth pointing out that Japan is making it easier for Chinese to come, and this is probably part of the quiet policy of the government to actually recognize that immigration is necessary for Japan, and it actually makes complete sense for it to be Chinese and Korean people, even if there's a lot of people who make songs on the internet, for example, who are terrified at the idea of these strange alien people coming to Japan. They're everywhere. If you go around in Tokyo now, seriously, you go to lately, it used to be there was always like one or two Chinese or Korean people at the convenience stores. Now you go to most convenience stores, sometimes an entire shift, everyone will be Chinese. I think it's good. I think it's nice. I mean, that's the ground level of people coming and integrating into the society here. I mean, I'm talking about Tokyo, of course. But yeah, Japan is quietly opening the doors without drawing too much attention to it, to the people who might get upset to immigration. So it is interesting. So yeah, all licensed under 45. So, but I think multiple entry visas, well, that could be for tourism as well. Who knows? I'm not exactly sure what the deal is, but the point is they're liberalizing it. It is going to be interesting to see how. Yes, the government is looking at changing employment regulations in Japan, and it could be getting to be more like America and other places. The X-Files is coming back. That's pretty good. This is a $3,500 VR 360-degree camera. It's still a little bit expensive, but I like that the technology is coming out. Shota Bodega saw a Chinese pharmacist today. Well, there you go. I mean, you know, and that's a good thing. Michael Gillen Peckett, I didn't realise that you had relatives in New Zealand, but yeah, I don't think you need to be concerned that there's a perception that New Zealand has a tough immigration. I think it's pretty typical. As people pretty often confuse New Zealand and Australia, and you know, the thing is, New Zealand's relatively open immigration policy was actually interesting. When I went on when I majored in Spanish at university, and I went to Spain for a few months. With an Australian and New Zealand group, it was interesting because Australia is so strict, and all the immigration arrangements are reciprocal, and New Zealand is so open. It meant that basically all the New Zealanders, we could rent a car and drive to Portugal or go over to France or whatever, and it was no big deal. The Australians couldn't. They have to actually apply for visas to be able to drive over those borders. I think it's different now, but just as an example, I mean, it's much better to have a New Zealand passport than an Australian passport, just because Australia is so strict, and everyone sort of gets their revenge by being strict back at them. Kind of sucks, actually. So I was always glad my sister and my mum are on Australian passports, and the New Zealand one is, I think, much better. So yeah. Twitch is interesting. I might go back to looking at seeing what it's like streaming on there. They're opening the door apparently now. They are still mainly gaming focused, but I've seen that they're having vlogs and stuff like that. I don't know anyone who's really on there though, and I had a look over there, and frankly it didn't look that interesting to me yet, but it is interesting. I mean, guys like PewDiePie and so on are going over there. I think it's also good to see what sort of features they have. I mean, I'm glad. I think YouTube is still obviously the place to be, but at the same time, it's nice to see that there are, you know, alternatives out there as well that might push them into at least coming up with new features and ideas for, you know, and new ways to engage. Yeah, good question by Giancarlo Sands. Would multiple entry visas really help a lot with Chinese immigration? At the end of the day, I think it's just making it easier to come back and forth. I mean, who knows? In the end of the day, I think the easier you can make it people feel that they can comfortably go back and forth, the more likely they will set up in the country, and I think that's probably part of the aim. By the way, the reboot series, the original reboot series of X-Files was actually very, very good. It was weird. and not like the original X-Files were weird. It was kind of a quasi-comedy series. But I really liked what they did, and I'm glad that they're extending it. I want to get that when I go to America. I'm going to be going to America. By the way, American people, I will be going to America in early September, probably. Mainly around Seattle. We'll see if I can do a stop on the way. Probably it'll be pretty tight like that, but there again, I have always wanted to go to Los Angeles, and I might have to fly through there again. So just a heads up. People in America would love to figure out some way to do something when I do that. But yeah. And absolutely, Dex Bala, the Third World War stuff is definitely fear-mongering by people who don't have any idea what they're talking about. But here we go. Twitch kicks off Science Week by streaming Carl Sagan's Cosmos, which is super old now, but it's always interesting to sort of watch. What else have we got here? YouTube's put 12 million videos accessible in restricted mode. I think this is to do with all the censorship of LGBT videos. More stuff about the Russians being on the North Korean border. No one knows what they're going to do. What else have we got here? How YouTube is going to teach teens to spot fake news, I don't know. Relaxation of visa requirements for Chinese people, so there you go, that's good news if you're Chinese. People ripping off photos. North Korean missiles. It's been a busy week. Are we on the cusp of World War III as tensions grow between North Korea and the US? Anna Fifield went on Nation NZ, I think on Radio New Zealand, and said no. So there you go. And she's probably, for media people, she's definitely I would consider to be the most, I suppose knowledgeable is a high threshold, because there are super experts out there. But in terms of like reporters covering North Korea, no question, she's like the best authority, I think, anywhere in the world at the moment on that. So yeah, and Mr. Kordychep, thanks for the update on that. And yeah, my understanding is the same as that as well, that it has gotten easier for Australians. It used to be really tough, and as a New Zealander I used to find that really funny, but it doesn't surprise me that situation has improved. Munchie's Seattle tour videos, I will do that, Shota Bodega. Thank you for the advice, or Shota Bodega. And Charles Singer, don't worry, America's pretty small, so you should be able to meet everyone here in a few days. Well, that's how it works where I come from, but you know, that's right. I'll probably cram it. I'll spread it out. I'll take my time. Do it over 3 days. R&D spending. Japan is high. A lot of countries, including Britain, are low. There is the multi-billion-dollar write-down on Toll Group, which is basically the Australian post office that was bought by Japan Post. Congratulations, Britain, you got through a whole day without burning coal for electricity, which is actually hard to do. I used to be a renewable energy policy consultant, and actually you can't have renewables, you can't have all this beautiful wind power and solar power without a good amount of thermal generators on the side to sort of balance out the inconsistent loads that happen when the wind changes, which mainly means gasoline, natural gas, coal, you know, all sorts of old-fashioned, all the stuff that you want to replace with wind. You need that to sort of make it feasible. But congratulations, Britain. Oof, sorry, I think I have the black lung just from reading that story. This is freaky. Elon Musk expects to have a brain-machine interface within 4 years. Okay, I'm not sure I want that, but there we go. Hey, Robert XXX001, just time to see on the end. That's right. Well, welcome. Good to have you along. What else have we got here? Bridgestone's airless tires. I kind of like to try this out. I mean, I like the idea of tires that don't need inflating. I mean, I wonder how long they'll last, but apparently this is already being used in military applications. It's pretty interesting. Can't you use uranium instead of dead dinosaurs then? You mean nuclear power? Well, yes. I mean, again, when I was doing policy in this area, nuclear energy is the friend of climate change policy. Even Robert Bellamy, even a lot of actual environmentalists in Britain were saying, you know, actually people have to stop thinking that we're going to get there with windmills, and that if we're really serious about fighting climate change, I mean, nuclear power is the best and most effective and efficient way to get there. This was all, of course, before the tsunamis, and this is back in the 90s, but it was actually a big pillar of Japan's plans for climate change. That it was going to rely on uranium. So there you go. Renewable energy consulting. You'd like to know more about my time as a renewable energy consultant? Well, I worked in a think tank, which is primarily focused on doing research work that went into the development of legislation and policies by the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry in Japan. And research which I did was mainly focused on, I got the job because I actually specialized in the negotiations behind the 1997 Kyoto Protocol as part of my law degree. And sorry, this is all incredibly boring stuff. But Japan's energy efficiency law was based on research of regimes basically for energy subsidies, for quotas of different types of renewable energy, and how those different types of diversification of energy was achieved in countries like Denmark, Britain, Germany, France. I've also looked at places like Texas and California, which had very successful renewables programs, and tried to take the best practices and what would work in Japan. I was responsible for gathering some of the research that went into that. And I also, in that time, I also contributed to Japan's soil pollution law, the updating of environmental standards, introduction of guidelines for promoting electric cars in Japan, and I also got to do a whole bunch of corporate health and safety sort of stuff like that as well. It was a really cool job. It was like being paid to be a university student, where my assignments were going into and becoming the context of Japanese legislation. So I got a real kick out of that. But I was there for about 5 years after my first job, and it was very, very interesting. So and you learn a lot. You learn a lot when if you want to increase wind power, you need to burn coal or petrol or something. In order to stabilize the inherently unstable sources of power, which basically, left to their own devices. If you put too much wind power without anything to offset the instability that it causes on a grid, it could cause an entire grid to go down. That's the problem. So there you go. I am always being sarcastic. Is that me or someone else? I don't know, but there we go. And that's right. Water pumping. Good information that's right. You can pump water is a good way to do it. There are limits to it, but that is one way that people like to do it. But even then, water pumping is more to do with making 24 hours. So for example, if you have solar power, you can, or if you have excess generation, you can do it that way. But in terms of keeping the grid on a stable frequency, you do actually need really short bursts, and there's nothing better than thermal for that. Still, it's getting better though. And yes, I like fusion. Kangen Kodos, was that really awesome? I'm happy to talk about any of this stuff actually in more detail any time. It is really, really interesting, and it is important. But the whole world seems to have pretty much given up on it, which is a shame. All of these things are possible. AEUSM 88. But the thing is to do things on the right scale to make it sort of feasible on a sort of a nationwide scale. And grid balance is something special. And I by the way, I don't profess to be an expert on it. I just learned enough to understand the issues behind it and the things that need to be addressed. You can't just, so many political parties were saying that we're going to have 50% wind power by 2020. And you can say that, but, grids can't sustain, even with offset balancing, even with hydro pumps and, special offsetting thermal generators, you can't really install more than, I think the number was, I'm trying to remember, 5 to 10% renewables on any grid. And a bigger problem in Japan is that Japan has 8 separate grids. It doesn't even have a unified national grid, which means that even if you have a place with lots of wind power, you can only use that wind power on that grid. It's a disaster, basically. It's very hard to fix. Yes, please, James O'Hara, keep working on that infinite energy machine. I assume that's what you're talking about. The only gaijin in the village, always an interesting topic, and one that I'm glad that I am not. the $3.5 million robbers, the Gaijin. This is an interesting one. I never thought of this. This has saved my life. Gaijin Confession Friday. I've been here 20 years. My confession is, I never thought of using ero as a way to remember left and right, the kanji for left and right. That's brilliant. I'm totally going to use that. What else have we got here? Pranks, YouTube news. Japan news has again been pretty quiet, I've got to say, apart from that big heist. And we're running out of time. If you got more questions for me, I'm quite happy to do. Dutch. So this is another one which I used to enjoy. The Dutch Railways is claiming that all the trains run on 100% wind energy, and that is true to the extent that you can purchase at a higher cost, wind energy. And if you live in Denmark, claims to be 100% renewable now, but it's not. The reason Denmark is 100% wind power based is because they share a shared European grid, which has France on it, which has an incredible, they have 50-60% nuclear power, and having all that stable nuclear power and all that sort of British coal power and everything on the same grid is what allows the stability, which lets you have Denmark there with all this wind power, and you can purchase that that power and whatever, and that's all great. But in the end of the day, if you really want to increase the amount of wind power, it's not simply a matter of buying the power that's there. It's great that it's in demand and that people are being conscious about trying to support it, but it's about finding the technical solutions and reducing the cost of generation, and the need to offset it to increase the percentage of the whole grid that is wind power. And that's kind of generally a technologically fixed number. That's the thing. But that said, it is wonderful that the Dutch Railways are aspiring to be 100% green in terms of their power sources, which is good. Coriolis effect. There we go. Where's butter and why is yellow? Apparently, butter's normally actually closer to white. It comes from milk, and a lot of companies artificially dye it yellow to make it that color. I don't actually know why it naturally becomes that, so I guess I can't help you. I did not know the Coriolis was in Planet of the Apes. But the Coriolis effect, a big feature of my life, because it caused, for most of my life, half of my life until now, the toilets to spin the wrong way, which is a lie. Don't believe that. Solar roadways is a good idea, which it isn't. Oh yes, I remember someone talking about that. I thought that was interesting. Victor was into that. I don't think I ever claimed to be into that. Who said that? It was an interesting idea, but yes, I don't know how you actually get that to work. Benjamin Harris asks, have I ever been up to Aomori? I've been in Hirosaki for 7 weeks mid-June. Wonder if there's anything there to do. I've been there for 12 hours in 1995. I had some soba at the station, or I had some udon actually at the station, udon shop, and it was very good. I don't know much about Aomori, I'm afraid, although right now is the best time of year to go because all the cherry blossoms are out, so you should get up there. I think it's Cornelius. Definitely not Coriolis. You fully charged guy. Am I fully charged? Let me see. You made me curious. Am I fully charged? 95%. I'm almost there. I know that's not what you meant, but it did make me curious. So is there anything else there interesting? Not really. I'm going to take any more questions. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap up. Chris Rodham, good to see you. As batteries farms are getting larger, especially with Tesla pushing them to more capacity, could lithium batteries replace those thermal plants on the grid as one of these days? Well, I know that's something that he wants to do. The thing about, again, lithium batteries, they're wonderful, but they're expensive, and they do have limited lifespans. So, and then you have to replace them, and then you have to deal with the nastiness of replacing batteries. So they're nice. Fuel cell batteries were always much more interesting and much more of a focus when I was studying, but the companies that were pushing that have all gone bust as well. So I don't know. Aomori apples, good point, Sergeant Bilko. Eat lots of apples when you're in Aomori. I'm a big fan of Elon Musk, and if he's figured out a way to get batteries to do the job, wunderbar. But back in the time I was doing this, which was between 2002 and 2006, yes, batteries were still a bit of an issue. So that's it. I must say, I've been enjoying discovering Netflix. I watched an Australian TV series called Glitch. Apparently it was on TV last year, I heard from my mum. but it is now available on Netflix. It was pretty good. It was an interesting sort of take on the theme that it's about. I won't give too much away about it, but it was worth watching. I really enjoyed The Get Down. The Get Down was awesome. I discovered reading about it after I finished watching all 2 seasons of it, that it cost $150 million to make, which was kind of ridiculous. It was made by the same director who made Strictly Ballroom, which was an awesome Australian movie. But yes, I've been enjoying. I really liked Black Mirror. Black Mirror on Netflix as well was like, oh my god, if this is like the quality of Netflix, I'm there. I don't need a TV anymore. So I really enjoyed what I've watched on there. And yeah, that is it for this week. I'll hopefully have more news next week. We will have another 2.5 Oyajis soon with a guest, although maybe not next week. I can't do this every week because I'll lose both my Saturdays and Sunday nights. But does anyone want to smell like Elon Musk? Well, who knows what he smells like. But he would be an interesting person to have a coffee with, I would say. I would like that. Legion. I saw Legion. Although Legion I didn't see on Netflix. I saw it on satellite TV, and that was worth a watch. That was also quite interesting and good to watch. Any other recommendations for Netflix? I'm reading a book at the moment, which is unusual. I didn't know that technically Get Down is one season. I guess they call it part 1 and part 2, but I mean, they're like the number of episodes in each one, it seems to amount to a season. I am enjoying watching the new season of Better Call Saul as it becomes live. And yes, I'm familiar that Black Mirror is a UK show, and it's brilliant. It's really good. I didn't know that only the most recent season. Well, actually, I thought the 3rd season was pretty good. And they're using more Americans as well, which I thought was pretty good. Marco Polo was good, but they dropped it. Okay, I didn't know that. Elon Musk is your favorite African American. Behave. Okay. It's been wonderful talking to you all, but I actually have to go to sleep and work and have a life. So, Beasts of the Nation, thank you for the tip. Actually, that is a good tip. I will check that out because I haven't seen that one. He smells like $1 billion. That's a very Kim, good call. Thank you for watching. Thank you for enjoying. I will see you all next week. And keep cool till after school. Kakita no. Peace. Boom. Ollie Olsen. That's what Ollie Olsen says. Okay, stop streaming. I thought for a minute that said stop screaming, but that wouldn't be it, would it? No. Okay.